Welcome, Liberty lovers. This is Matthew Struck with Y Libertarian coming at you a night early this week. We have a little bit of a conflict tomorrow night, but it is Monday at 5. Normally, you see us Tuesday at 5. Tonight, we have a fantastic episode, something that I had the pleasure of taking part in over the weekend, and we have a special guest with us. Before we get rolling on that, a little bit of business here. Please, if you're watching the live stream, like, comment, subscribe, and share. Retweet, hit the notification bell. We do take live comments and questions. So if you've got something to say or something to share with us or our guest, please do that. And so without further ado, I have Sara Razi with me from Young Americans for Liberty. Long time no see, Sara.
Hi.
So now, before we kind of get into like Young Americans for Liberty and everything like that, what kind of brought you to like the liberty and libertarian movement?
Well, originally, when I first started becoming active in politics, I was in a podcast and I knew several libertarians within that podcast kind of introduced me to libertarianism. And with what is happening, with what has been happening in New Jersey with like the lockdowns and excessive restrictions, I began to realize how this is so wrong and tyrannical and how everything around me has been changing so rapidly. And that's how I realized maybe I was a libertarian all along. So I began reading about libertarianism and I began like watching a lot of like libertarians like talk on YouTube, such as Ron Paul and Rand Paul and Thomas Massey. And also, I believe it was Justin Amash who actually brought me to a liberty movement because he always called out the two-party system for always doing very corrupt things. And he's right in a way because it has lost its way, like Congress has lost its way. And in order to bring change, libertarians and like everybody in like the bottom left two quadrants have to work together in order to bring that change. So yeah, that's why I came into
I love that. I love that. And so you would consider yourself what, millennial, Gen Zer? Is that kind of like a dividing line you even put on yourself? What would you consider yourself?
honestly, I was just born in 2000, so whatever that is, I guess it's Gen Z.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. So you're young and involved in the movement. I love that. How did you get involved in Young Americans for Liberty?
So I actually so some guy named Gabe Vino, he found me on like social media and he asked me, "Hey, do you want to join Rutgers YAL?" And which is one of my chapters right now because I'm the state chair in New Jersey. So I was like, sure. So I came into one meeting and the guys were just, bonding and having bro time. And I realized, wow, this is the type of vibe I want to like be a part of. And I then found myself having so much in common with like the people around me, even if it
Yeah.
was remotely, like online. And that's how I actually became involved in YAL. And then it wasn't until the former New Jersey state chair, whose name's Akshay Arora, he was stepping down, who was looking for a successor, and he asked me, and I decided to like step up.
Awesome. Awesome. So before we get into kind of like the broader sense of what YAL is and the Leadership Academy that we took part in over the weekend, there's like this kind of broader question, I guess, maybe recently that's being talked about in terms of like just women within the liberty and the libertarian movement. I mean, as a woman within the libertarian movement or the liberty movement, like what's that experience like for you?
Honestly, as of right now, it's a pretty positive experience. However, I see a lot of women that are being insulted online via social media for just saying the silliest type of things. And including me, like I have been like criticized for saying a bunch of things that are against the ordinary. Like, and typically, if you're not the typical libertarian that people want you to be, especially if you're a woman, you will be called out for it and you will be mocked for it. And I believe that a lot, not only in the liberty movement, but in conservative politics. Like, there were a lot of men that doubt our credentials when women are actually kicking ass. Like, my first month in as a state chair, we at YAL, we usually have something called State Chair of the Month. Literally, there is the entire country is divided into 8 regions. Well, actually, 8 different sections, and 6 out of 8 of those regions, like 6 girls became state chair of the month, including me. And there's only 2 guys, and that's when the females dominated the liberty movement, and we showed them that we could kick ass.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
I like to hear that. I've definitely, again, I can't walk a mile in those shoes. But I've definitely heard some of those, diverse opinions of like, it's empowering, right? But at the same time, there's some haters that are out there that are, they're the very gung ho kind of like you said, libertarians and liberty types. Most of them male, and like if you don't liberty hard enough, you're not one of us. Like one of those things. Yeah, I can definitely see that that's problematic, or at the very least, we're kind of like missing an opportunity there where there's a big cross section of a lot of liberty-minded women that I think would find their way to, kind of our neck of the woods if we were a little bit more, not necessarily accommodating, but just, we can be a wolf pack sometimes and basically jump on each other.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, one more thing, like I actually agree with that. If we were less of a wolf pack and more welcoming, like how we're at, like with YAL, I
Mhm.
feel like more women would be getting more active and more like open in the liberty movement.
Mm.
Because what we need to do is spread a positive like hemisphere and atmosphere around like libertarian politics in general. Because if you take a look at the past, in 2008, it was basically like Ron Paul. It was all male figures in the liberty movement,
Right.
which turned into be present day Justin Amash, who is far down, and then there is Rand Paul, who's like in the middle, who's like in the Republican Party. Like
Yep.
you have so many men who are figures in the liberty movement, but there's very little women, and it has proven to me that liberty women are truly the backbone of the liberty movement.
I got to be honest too. This is going to be a little bit of a hot take, and I would love to hear your opinion on it.
Yeah,
A lot of men, I think there's got to be something like evolutionarily or like genetically that's kind of like a part of this. There's a lot of men where they would rather kind of like beat their chest so that they don't have to fight, whereas women will like lay in wait quietly and then like all of a sudden jump on you and rip your face off, right?
yes,
Which I think we need, because there's a ton of libertarian or liberty dudes out there that are like beating their chest. And then the question is, all right, well, when it comes down to it, are you grinding it out? Are you going door to door? Are you, phone banking and stuff like that? I definitely see the women probably being more successful, or at least leading the way when it comes to that, because also, if you live a life where you're being basically considered the underdog, or people are skeptical of you all along, I think that lends its weight to like when you rise to the top, it's because you're kicking people's ass. It's not because like you just happen to luck out, right?
yeah.
Yeah. I forget what comedian it was, but there was a comedian that talked about like the difference between like boys and girls in high school, and how like boy fights are all like a bunch of like shoving and just kind of like posturing and stuff, but like girl fights when they happen are just like vicious, like they don't pull any punches.
Oh yes, definitely. And I won't lie to you, the women are very vicious as well. Like people shouldn't be doubting our like what our abilities or like what we're capable of, because we can fight back twice as harder. We're just not so upfront about it.
Yeah.
And it could just be like, well, like what you said, like an evolutionary thing. But take a look at it. Like the House of Representatives has doubled their numbers in members in Republican women. A
Mm-hmm.
Republican woman rocked the House this election cycle. So it
Yep.
is the year of not only for conservative women, but liberty women too, like Nancy Mace, Lauren Boebert, and sadly Kim Klacik, who did lose her race, but she left an impactful like inspiration amongst a lot of women.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So, all right. So, I love that, and I definitely agree with you. I think there's a ton of women that were elected this election cycle to the legislature specifically. And what I liked about it, not all of them would consider themselves libertarians, but I think they were at the very least, libertarian leaning women. Which, again, like I really don't care if you're a man or a woman. If you end up in Congress, you know, um, the big meter stick is if you stand for liberty and you stand for libertarianism. But I think that's really reassuring. So in that context, how does YAL, Young Americans for Liberty, kind of like fit into this overarching, liberty movement that's happening right now?
So what we do is that we're like an entire type of house with multiple steps. So on the top we have YAL National. On and basically within like the middle and to the top, we have our state chairs. Our state chairs, well, my job is to also educate people about the principles of liberty and also freedom within college campuses and in the community. And what we do is that we find members, we educate them, and show them the light of the liberty movement. And we also empower liberty movement on college campuses by holding free speech events and tabling. And we also hold events and small little get-togethers in order to like bring them towards the liberty movement. And what we also do at YAL is that we also have Operation Win at the Door. So that is a campaign strategy in order to hire election coordinators who are these people, usually college students, to knock doors for candidates. And we help knock doors and we go door to door and have face-to-face conversations with just local people anywhere in the United States of America in order to like educate them about our candidates and how they stand for state principles and how they also stand for libertarian or libertarian-like principles as well. And therefore, like we do end up getting a lot of these candidates elected into state houses. And we have seen a great, I think we're already at like 179, what's it called? 179 people that are elected to office this year.
Yeah, I'm actually gonna. There's so much to unpack there. I'm actually going to pull up. Let's see. This is the YAL homepage with the candidates so far that have been listed as winners, and I guess we're waiting for maybe final confirmations on these races. So this number needs to be updated. 56 is way low. I think at last count it was like something crazy, like what 170 or something.
Yes.
I think it's like up there, right? So, and if you notice, it's very heavy in terms of like, it's only the midsection of the state east. So there's definitely a ton that needs to be filled in here. But yeah, I think the take home message that I got, and we'll get into the leadership training too, but the take home message I really got from YAL was an extremely kind of like grassroots, like ground up movement that is like grinded out, like no front running, no kind of like grandstanding. It was literally kind of the meat and potatoes, like what needs to be done in order to win these races. And it's a lot of youth, like in the leadership conference, in the leadership candidate training. I felt like one of the old fuddy-duddies because I was like, I'm 39 and like everyone else around me is like, 20 or early 30s at oldest, but yeah, that's really what the take I got from it. And it really is that kind of like that grassroots, like just really from the square, the ground up kind of organization to help get liberty-minded candidates, not just to, I mean, YAL doesn't get candidates to run. They help them by giving them resources and stuff. But YAL is like the cavalry, right? So like you have to prove that you're doing well as far as the race that you're running, and then you have a winnable race. And then YAL comes in and just kind of like throws gasoline on the fire. Is that the way you would say it?
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah.
We also,
go ahead.
I'm sorry. So we also find candidates who also need a little help to get to the finish line. And once we find out who those candidates are, we send all of our people, all our resources towards them in order to help them to win the race.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. And a lot of them are college kids, right? So I think you said, what, do you work on Rutgers campus, or are there other colleges as well that you're involved in?
There's other colleges. So what I do is that since I'm the state chair, I have 3 active college campuses right now because everything's remote right now. And I have community chapters. So my 3 main college campuses are right now Rutgers University, New Brunswick, Montclair State University, and Stevens Institute of Technology.
Awesome. And so in terms of your involvement at the college level, it sounds like one is educational, right? Like just kind of communicating what liberty and libertarianism is to these kids, right? And then 2 is trying to source from that group that you're educating, the most dedicated to come in and be a part of this, like, I guess I'll call them a brigade, right? Like that ends up, responding in these races that need that kind of manpower. Is that what you would say is the case?
Yes.
Awesome. What's like your biggest, let me put it this way. What's like your biggest like, headwind that you have to face when you're working in that environment? Like what do you come up against the most often, or what's the hardest thing that you have to overcome?
Hardest thing I have to overcome is breaking through the ice because as I mentioned before, like I stepped up to take this position and now I'm still fairly new to it. So I have to break the ice and like get to know everybody in this network. So that's also kind of hard. I mean, I'm doing good at it, but I'm
Yeah.
not perfect yet. Um and also like the biggest obstacle is dealing with these like remote situations where okay, we cannot hold that many events right now because we're severely limited, but like it's also hard to keep my members active, so we have to come up with a bunch of events and keep them active. So those are the biggest roadblocks right now.
What do those events look like? Is it just like pizza and like, or is there something kind of more inventive that goes with them?
No, so we invite speakers from Mises, and we also like hear them talk, well, we also let them tell us their backstories, and we
Mhm.
also like take notes, and we also ask them questions. We also we also meet up, and we also do events. Actually yesterday with my Rutgers chapter, we held an event called Operation Helping Hand, which is what we're doing at YAL actually. Um is to actually get donations and get people to donate for the homeless people during the month of December. And so we take these donations and we donate to homeless shelters around the country. And that's what everybody has been doing. So I recently did that with my Rutgers chapter and it was successful.
That's
So
awesome.
there's ways around it, but like we also do like events like games, and we also do events like like I'm trying to think, meme tournaments where we all battle out like who has the best meme, and whoever wins that tournament wins a $10 gift card.
That's awesome. There's a game like that, right? Is it like Memes Against Humanity or something like that? Or
Cards Against Humanity. We also do that too. We do
yeah,
Among Us and Cards Against Humanity.
yeah. One thing I've been thinking about is like I play video games. I'm older, but I'm also nerdy at the same time. So like there's a big deal of like AOC live streams on Twitch playing Among Us, and like I play Hermitcraft with my son. So like I watch some of the YouTubers that do like Hermitcraft stuff, like Minecraft stuff. But so my thought was we need like a bunch of like liberty and libertarian people doing like live streams of Among Us. Um, but like in the in-between time, just like being true liberty and libertarians. Like, let me just put it that way. Like, as opposed to calling someone suspect, be like, I think he's the Fed. Like he's the Fed. Like you know. I definitely got to figure out how to put that together. If anyone thinks that would be interesting, if you end up watching this, if you're live, or if you end up watching this after the fact and you think that would be interesting, or if you're interested in taking part, I will find a way to live stream on Twitch if you want to do that. So
Honestly, I think I might have a few people who will be down to do that, but we'll see.
let's make it happen. I want to be the imposter and just kill some folks. I mean, like, but so anyway, bloodlust aside. All right, so cool. So I think everyone kind of has an idea of YAL in terms of like the college presence. YAL also has this awesome piece to it. I think is it called the Leadership Institute, LI?
Yes.
Okay. And what does the Leadership Institute really kind of focus itself on?
Okay, so the Leadership Institute focuses heavily on conservative, like young conservative people who are in the conservative movement, and helps cultivate new leaders in the conservative movement. So what they do is that they help find these leaders, they help find us the list that we need in order to find new members, such as conservatives, because YAL is actually a nonpartisan organization, which means we are not primarily libertarian, but we are open to like conservatives or liberals. Like I know a few of my co-state chairs actually have Bernie Bros in their network, so it's actually really funny. So we Leadership Institute helps us cultivate new leaders in YAL, and they also have internships for our students, and
Mhm.
they also like help us like find people who are capable of becoming the next leaders.
So I think that's awesome. That's like what I love about it is there's like this ecosystem that YAL has built. That's like they try and help give at least the resources and cultivate the candidates that they would eventually want to support, right? And just full disclosure, like YAL is not running campaigns. That's not their goal, right? YAL is trying to find the campaigns that are behind candidates that are really in the libertarian or liberty mindset and driven by those kind of principles, and they're trying to put them over the top. They're trying to get them to the finish line and get them to win those races. And the Leadership Institute put on this leadership. I'm just gonna share the screen share of kind of like the publicity here for it. But both Sara and I went to this event, the Leadership Candidate, I believe it's Leadership Candidate Academy. Is that what LCA stands for?
No, Liberty Candidate Academy.
Liberty Candidate Academy. We went to at Newark this past weekend, and the like you said, it wasn't like they were checking your voter registration or your party registration at the door, right? It's a matter of you fill out the application, and if you legitimately believe in liberty-minded principles, they're going to let you in because they want to get you somewhere into this ecosystem, either running or helping campaigns get to the point where YAL can get involved and get them over the finish line. What was your big takeaway? Was this the first LCA that you had taken part in, or have you done one in the past?
This was actually the first LCA I've ever bid to, and I was honestly impressed.
Awesome. So what really kind of like pushed you to go? Was it just like you had intended to go all along and weren't able to make it? I mean, it was extremely convenient for me. It took me like 25 minutes to get into Newark and go to this thing.
Well, I actually live 45 minutes away from Newark. I live in like Freehold. And honestly, I was really motivated to go. Like this, I actually found out about this event when I was like in the process of becoming a state chair. And I was like, well, I really care about this state and I really want to get like a liberty leaning like person elected in 2021, especially in state assembly. So I decided to go not only but to like help find like people who are willing to run in our state, and also I can learn because in the future maybe I want to run for office. So I do want to take a few like strategies away from this academy and put it into my own notes and look at it.
Yeah. This was, so full disclosure, I work in an industry where like I do risk management for public sector accounts, right? Municipalities, school districts. So I kind of live in the political world, but at the same time, I've never run for office. So I don't know what the campaign side is. I know what the governance side looks like of being an elected official, because I'm typically helping them out or their appointees out in terms of trying to risk manage the actual operations that they're tasked with heading up or at least overseeing. And it was 12 and a half hours of just intense, like you do this, then you do this, then you do this. And the one thing that I noticed is if you haven't gone through this kind of training, you think you can just sit back and like be charismatic and take a couple of publicity shots and end up winning an election. It is the complete antithesis to that. It is like you have to make this, you have to eat, sleep, and breathe it for however long you're running, 6, 12, 18 months, right? And even then you might not win, right? Like even then you still could lose by like 20 or 30 votes. But that was really the take home, because I think so many times, and is it Maggie Anders? I'm saying her last name wrong, right?
Maggie Anders.
So she was just on Todd Hagopian's podcast, Chief Chats, right? Yeah. And she alluded to something similar as well. Like a lot of libertarian campaigns are just not good campaigns. Like they're just, and it's not the principles, it's not the talking points, it's just strategically how they're run are either lazy or completely haphazard. This was like literally boot camp, like 18 steps. If you follow the roadmap, you're probably going to be more successful than not. Were you expecting that? Like having been part of the YAL community before, were you expecting that level of like specificity and just kind of structure that came out of it?
No, I was not. And that's actually really impressed me because I do know, like, there's a reason why I'm not indirectly like involved with the LP for this reason because the LP isn't, to be honest, the LP isn't serious about running their candidates. Their strategy is just, in my opinion, not beneficial at all because their candidates are lazy. And it's not a matter of picking better candidates. It's about reforming your campaign strategies and it's about reforming and taking in these steps that Justin Maloney presented. He's a great
Yep.
man, by the way. He honestly presented these 18 steps in one day, and they don't even take time to do that. What they do is that they're like, okay, you take a publicity shot. Okay, you just have to call it the two-party system and look good, and libertarians will love you. That's not how you run a campaign.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Like,
it's,
yeah.
Go ahead. I cut you off.
It's okay. So, like, if you are serious about running, if you are serious about getting people elected, it's not only dependent on the candidate, it's dependent on the entire team and the resources you put in. It's about knocking doors, phone banking, volunteering, putting in every single ounce of effort in order to get these people into office.
Yeah. No, I share your I share your impression from the inside out, right? So I've seen a lot of those campaigns be run by people that in this episode of Chief Shots that Maggie was a part of, they talked about, or even in earlier ones, they talked about like, the nature of libertarian campaigns and how a lot of them are just kind of like running someone so that there's someone in the slot, right? So that the party gets some kind of like name recognition or something. YAL really kind of hammered home that even in the campaigns that they get involved in, they're seriously vetting, like just because you run doesn't mean they're going to support you. They're seriously vetting the campaigns. You are seriously vetting the campaigns that have an actual shot of winning, right? And that's the thing. It's like you can't just run someone to run someone. Like there legitimately has to be a litmus test. I mean, in some cases, it's okay to kind of like, stuff the ballot and make sure that you have people in each one of those positions. But truthfully, when it comes to like resources and how you kind of deploy your resources, it needs to be to like people that are like ride or die, like gamers, like they are in it. They're going to knock doors until their freaking feet bleed. Like that's the people that you need to be running. And I agree with you. I think the Libertarian Party, for the most part, they believe the ideals are enough. And that's just not true. It's like there's a marketing component to it. There's a sweat equity and blood equity component to it. And there's also a strategic component to it, right? Like, so I got so much out of this training that I can't even begin to describe it. But have you been involved in any specific campaigns? I know that you're based in New Jersey, so have there been any campaigns that you've gotten involved in yet, or has it been mostly kind of like on the recruitment and education side that you're working on?
No, as of right now, I am working on the recruitment and education side because, like, as of right now, I'm still waiting on like what type of candidates we are electing into office in 2021, and then I'll go from there. But as of right now, I'm on the educational and the leadership type of side of the liberty movement because the whole point is that there are two different sides. There's people who are getting these candidates elected, and then there's also people tend to forget about the side of educating libertarianism. And I feel as if that is incredibly important too, because how are you going to build a movement when you're not finding libertarians and educating them, or liberty-minded people and educating them on the purpose of liberty and limited government?
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic point. The candidates can't be the ones educating people. They just can't. They have to be the people that are connecting the dots, right? Like they have to be the people that take that educational piece and connect it to the emotional or the practical application piece to let people understand what the past looked like and what the future will look like if you decide to jump into this pool. And so I appreciate that fully. Like that educational piece it's so crucial, and it's not going to happen by a snarky comment on Twitter. It's just you're not going to win very many votes getting into like a tiff on Twitter. You can make a name for yourself. I mean, you can get some attention by doing that. But I don't think you're going to win very many votes from that standpoint. But what were some of your other takeaways from? I mean, could be strategic takeaways from the training, or just kind of like general networking, or what else did you walk away with?
Most importantly, understanding certain demographics within your state. So, like, you have to understand and you have to look at the patterns of past elections and your neighboring districts, because one district could be completely different from the others. You have to be careful on how the voting strategy works within the two districts. And you have to look you have to look at past and up and down ballot elections. You
Yeah.
have to look at every little thing. And what I really took away is that you have to recruit to volunteer for these campaigns, because how can these campaigns function without volunteers? And
Yeah.
that's really important. And YAL presses on that a lot, because like we have to push our own staff to go and we have to push our own staff to go and work on these campaigns to make Liberty win as well. And the only way we can get volunteers is by educating, which is the job of the state chairs, is how, yes, we educate, but we also help recruit these people to work on campaigns.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that was a huge takeaway. It was, you have to be really strategic, not in just how you run a campaign, but whether you run at all, right? So, like picking the opportunity, you have to be able to gauge whether or not an opportunity is actually something that's winnable. I think all too often, like dyed in the wool libertarians are thinking that the principles alone will carry them to victory. That's not the case. Like, people are fickle. Like, as good of a case as you make, a lot of them are just going to vote Republican or Democrat because that's what they identify as, right? There is literally a targetable group of people that you can win their votes. And then there's other people where if you try and win their votes, you're basically spinning your wheels. You're just wasting your time, right? And sometimes an entire district is made up of those people. So you can't run that race and win, right? I think the other piece was the data centric piece of it was fantastic. I loved that discussion, which is actually something that came out of, if I'm not wrong, like Obama's campaign runs, really specifically in terms of the way that they used voter data and data analytics when it came to canvassing. Is there anything that kind of like popped out to you from that discussion?
Well, you can see that Obama actually won a lot within districts that were highly blue and very liberal. And then you can see that he lost in districts that are actually red leaning and, Republican or rural, backgrounds. So you can see that voters prefer their candidates based on what district they belong to, because it all depends on your surroundings and the people that you surround yourself with. That's what creates your entire political philosophy.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's really important. What I also find interesting was the data analytics gives you insight into like where to spend your time, right? So you can't just take the entire district and every single registered voter and then try and knock on their door. You're gonna waste at least 40% of your time, right? But I think it's also interesting that there's a subset of that population that if you hardcore like dedicate your time to try and reach them and really be kind of like in front of them, just name recognition alone gets you pretty far down the line. I forget who the candidate's name was who won in Connecticut. She was fantastic. Shoot, I can't remember her name, but so she came to the training, right? And she basically told the story about how like a lot of the people that she talked to, whether or not they were potential voters or even just the delegates for getting like the party's nomination, the laziness of the incumbent of not even talking to the delegates, like the assumed nomination that they were going to get from being just, putting that R next to their name was pretty interesting. What did you kind of take away from, her story as far as, her campaign and how she won?
Well, her story was extremely interesting because she is a mother of four and she is conservative, and she ran actually primarily on the issue of taxation. And within the Northeast, taxes are extremely high. It is ultimately theft. And The issue is if you run on that and Republicans say that, they're going to be like, oh my God, I love you. Well, if they're not rhinos, of course. But
Yeah.
anyway, so you run on the issue of taxation and the press for low taxes, Republicans will immediately look at you and be like, whoa, she is amazing. And then, but the problem is they're going to forget about you when they see a long-term incumbent still in office that's also running but not doing anything. So they're going to be like, oh, do I vote for this new lady or do I stick to somebody who I'm more comfortable with, who I know and who my family knows?
Yeah.
But the entire the data determines on how well a candidate can perform, not only by how they run their campaign or how much money is being placed in their campaign, but if the candidate, like he or she, whoever the candidate is, gets out and talks to these voters face to face and just has a casual conversation with them. Because like even if you look at like the election in 2020, like the national election, like you see like Donald Trump versus Joe Biden. Honestly, Biden was more charismatic than Donald Trump ever was. And that is a fact. Like, yeah, he was nice. Like, yeah,
I,
Biden
I
was
would I
nice.
would call him more approachable, right? Like he was
Yeah,
more approachable. Yeah. Whereas Trump was this very much kind of like, if you're not with me, you're against me kind of person. Yes. Yeah,
you
I would
can't
agree
have
with you.
that. You,
Yeah.
I don't think that's the best approach to ever have when you're trying to win an election. That's how you lose because a lot of these people are normal. They don't care about politics. They don't look into policies. They look at you as like an inspiration and a hero. So if you don't have a good impersonation off the top, then you're practically like, I don't know, you practically lose your chances.
So
And what she did was amazing. She got into their face and she talked to them and had a normal conversation, went door to door.
yeah. So have you ever heard the phrase that politics is basically a beauty pageant for ugly people? Have you ever heard about that?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So that's always what comes to mind when it comes to like someone talking about like agreeableness or like how they present themselves and things like that. Libertarians don't want to come off as like false, right? Like or fake. They want to come out like hardcore. These are the principles. But I think you can take a note from Ron Paul, which, by the way, so one thing that really came to mind was you mentioned it. YAL loves hunting rhinos, okay? And they love hunting rhinos in primaries. All right. So if you are someone who professed to be a supporter of liberty, and once you got into office, you decided to just like tuck tail and run over to the other side because like it was easier or they promised you something, YAL is supporting the candidates that are going to primary you, not necessarily just, kind of take you on in the general. The other thing I found interesting was regardless of the people in the room, whether they identified as libertarian, conservative, libertarian conservative, whatever they called themselves, most of them would have said like, Ron Paul was an absolutely fantastic candidate. And Ron Paul was not a libertarian type candidate that was sitting there and was like all fire and brimstone, right? Like, and he also wasn't sitting there trying to run a college level seminar on libertarianism. He got agitated when he needed to strategically, but the majority of the time he was well dressed. He was open minded. He was well spoken. Like all of those things are extremely important. You can't just take libertarian ideals or principles and think that they are going to sell you. Like you have to be the messenger. And I think that's something that I took away from that. It was like there is a component there where it's like you have to be a good steward of those principles. I love the fact that you said that some of your events are kind of like, giving back charitably or to the community, because a lot of folks that are within the libertarian world will say, well, yeah, well, charity will take care of it or nonprofits will take care of it. And then you're like, okay, well, what soup kitchen have you worked at? Or, what organizations have you donated to or have you like volunteered for? And they're like stuck for an answer, right? You have to live it. Like you have to, the key is don't be fake. Like if you're getting in it just to get votes, you're doing something just to get votes. And this was in the training. This was also very telltale. If you're going to become part of an organization because you think it's going to win you votes, and then the moment you lose the election, you leave the organization, you weren't in it for the right reasons. Like you should not have done that in the first place. You're basically pandering. you're no better than all the rest of the politicians that we basically, put up on the dartboard and throw darts at. But yeah, that was really telling. I think it was really important to talk about kind of like how candidates present themselves. Libertarians typically score very low on agreeableness, right? But there needs to be an agreeable, approachable nature to you, at least in some facets, for you to be, a feasible candidate. And that candidate from Connecticut, she had it. She was extremely well spoken, poised. She was measured when she said her words. And at the same time, she was not like, beating you over a head with liberty principle stick to say like, this is what you should do. I'm pretty sure she has well-adjusted kids because that just came across extremely well. What did you get a sense of the group? Like, in terms of like the collection of people that were there, what was your impression of the folks that showed up?
The folks were actually extremely determined, and they were actually very attentive and very like not even. I mean, not all of us would be pro liberty, but like pro like bringing change within the liberty movement and conservative. Like, yes, not everybody might be a libertarian, but they all believe in one thing, and that is to bring change to the system, and that is the way of like bringing change via right wing politics. And so these people, they seem so determined to either take away something from this candidate academy and use it towards future campaigns. And they were also very like what's it called? They were very I'm trying to think. I'm sorry, brain fart. They're
That's all
also
right.
very
Talk around it. Give me synonyms. I'll get you there.
No, they were actually very determined in order to win. That's why they were there. And in order for them to have a successful campaign, they have to take these 18 steps and put it into their own strategic ways. And if they are actually truly like committed to running and winning an election, they will send back their application to Justin Maloney, and we will help them get there.
Yeah, and full respect. Justin ran a fantastic. I mean, just think about it. Anytime you get a bunch of people in a room for like 12 and a half hours, it's like 3 hours in, everyone's like, "Man, is this over yet?" It wasn't like that. Aside from his taste in very bad pizza because he was in New Jersey and he fed us Papa John's. Justin, what the anyway, but the overall program was absolutely fantastic, and I agree with you. The people in the room, they were not like, if you talk to anyone in there, you were probably aligned with 99% of what they were talking about. The other 1%, even if you disagreed with them, they were open to discussion and they wanted to talk about it and kind of like work through their position versus your position. It was extremely positive. Not to mention the fact that I have to give it up to the other Leadership Institute representatives that were there. Like a couple of them, I was like, why are you not running for office? Because the way they presented themselves and just how they communicated what needs to be successful, not to mention their past experience with being involved with campaigns themselves. Like they know the special sauce, but what's beautiful is they're using their skills and their experience and their talent to not just win one race for themselves. They're doing it to legitimately win what we're up to 170 plus races at statehouse level, races this election cycle, which is unbelievable. So yeah, big like props to Justin. He put together a fantastic, event and program and kind of thing. Where's your future lie? What are you ultimately looking to do? Is it run for elected office, or is it kind of move up the ranks in terms of the YAL hierarchy there?
I actually am a college student, so I'm a political science major at Rutgers University right now, and so I am planning on finishing my degree with a minor in economics, and I plan on actually becoming an attorney, preferably in real estate or like prosecution. But I also want to work heavily in politics. So honestly, I'm not sure, but like maybe one day I will like hope to like run for office one day and get elected, usually within state politics, because I'm more concerned about New Jersey than I am about the overall country.
Yeah, that's something that's really tough. Yeah, like New
Yeah.
Jersey, I mean, it is completely valid to call New Jersey the Soviet socialist state of New Jersey, because the Republicans here aren't even really Republicans. And granted, that is a very wide sweeping stereotype, but the handful that are truly like liberty minded, I can literally name probably on one hand that I've met, like, and with probably with one or two fingers left over. But the 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 question is always like, do I leave or do I stay and I fight the fight? Right. That room at that training was filled with people, regardless of what state they were from, that are legitimately looking to fight the fight. Right. And a lot of them, because it was in Newark, they were from northeastern. This is a new phrase I'm using after, I don't know if you heard Shane Hazel's episode of Radical, this most recent one, but the idea of champagne socialist. There's a lot of champagne socialists in the Northeast right now. I'm going to use that phrase as much as I can from here on out. But there's a lot of people in that room that are legitimately the stay and fight type, which I appreciate. Like, it's so easy to just kind of like cut bait and be like, you know what? New Jersey's a lost cause. New York's a lost cause. Connecticut's a lost cause. Let's just go somewhere like New Hampshire or Texas or somewhere like that, Tennessee, and just try and make that as liberty minded as possible. But there were fighters in the room. I appreciate that. And they definitely, there was definitely a motivation there that you could sense. It was like palpable. But
Yeah.
no, I can appreciate that. Like, get your professional ducks in a row, I would say. And then once you have kind of like that foundation to build off of, like, then go from there. I think what's really interesting is, have you ever looked at this? So like, a lot of people look back at Lincoln, right? We've been talking about Black Lives Matter and kind of like the racial equity and equality conversation within the country. Like, Lincoln was a school teacher, right? Was he a school teacher or an attorney? I thought he was a school teacher.
I'm not sure. I think it
Yeah,
was. I
But
could
but
be wrong.
I think the take home was he was not a career politician, right? Like, that's something that's completely different today than, even 150 years ago. Was, the majority of politicians got into this as kind of like their second life. Now there's so many people that are just like, you know what, I'm getting into politics. And you're like, you're freaking 15 years old. Like, what are you talking about? Like, it's like they want to get into it as their first like career. And that really kind of gives me a moment for pause. Like, I want people like you alongside of me that have lived another life, because you can actually draw upon what it's like to be in a profession that's not politics, and make a business work, or learn how to take care of clients, right? Or learn how the judicial system works actually on the ground, versus from the standpoint of a lawmaker who has never been subjected to it the same way that everyone else has. I find that interesting. Real estate or prosecution? Why those two?
So I actually, my father, he's a real estate broker. He's a broker of
Okay.
record right now in New Jersey. So, I actually got involved in real estate. Like, he was like, "Why don't you just try it out? You might like it, and it's honestly an easy business." So I basically I did a few internships in his office, and I actually learned about real estate. And honestly, real estate is like the big apple of the American dream. Like, think about it. You are giving people the right to like live in a house or like an apartment, and you're giving them this opportunity to live in a beautiful home and raise a family. And that
Right.
is the purpose of the American dream, to work hard, to get a house, to live your life. And that helps with people bring them into achieving the American dream, which has unfortunately lost its way.
Yeah.
And we need to bring that back. And that's why I feel like real estate is the key to doing that.
Wow. So I have to ask myself, like, do we go down this rabbit hole? I definitely want to go down this rabbit hole. All right. So I think we've talked enough about Yale and leadership training and things like that. Definitely go to the Yale website, find out more. Young Americans for Liberty. I think it's what YALiberty.org. Is that that's the website? Hold on.
Yes, it's
YALiberty.org. Okay, so that being said, aside, we have as a country, for some reason, the American dream, you are completely correct. It used to be land, right? Like when we were moving west, it was always like the land races and land grants and things like that, okay? It was owning property. It was owning property because property was the means of production, right? Whether you put a farm there, whether you put a factory there, okay? It was owning hard assets. It was owning things like gold and silver, so that if the currency ever like was worth nothing, you still had something of value that you could like, live and subsist off of. We've done such an amazing job as a society and a culture of convincing people, young and old, mostly young, that they need to like have these like worthless pieces of paper. Okay. And the easiest target is like dollar bills, right? Like fiat currency. That's the easiest kind of like manifestation of it. The other manifestation of it is things like, stock certificates in companies. Okay. And being a free market capitalist, I'm completely for investing in companies. But you have to understand that there is like there is like a truth serum that you need to have on hand, where when you're looking at a company, the perfect example is, and you didn't have the benefit of living through this, but I lived through the dot-com bubble. Okay, as an adult, all right, and or as a semi-adult, and I can remember day trading every single day, and the companies that I was buying stock in, I knew were worthless, right? Like, and that was the game. It was the sleight of hand to be like, see, this looks absolutely amazing. You should buy a stake in it. And when you had stock in it, you're like, see, I own something, and you're like, you own nothing. That's like smoke. It's mist, right? The people who they own property, they own the factory, they own the minerals that go into making the metals that create the things in the factories, right? That is such an interesting point. Like, real estate is something that I would imagine. Have you read Rich Dad Poor Dad?
I have
Robert
not.
Kiyosaki. Definitely read Robert Kiyosaki. Okay. I don't know if he's a self-professed libertarian, but he definitely speaks about liberty type values, at least when it comes to like the market and free market. But that is something we've done such a good job of. We've sold the American people on the idea that they could buy like smoke, like snake oil, and all of a sudden they have this amazing asset. And you're like, you own nothing. You have no value for the thing that you own, because it's all this kind of like assumed mystique that goes into it. Like, do you kind of get that impression? Like, are your peers that are your age, like, are they looking at things and they're like, wow, like I own I own like, whatever stock in this company or something, and you're like, you know what, if it all goes to hell, you have nothing, right? Like, do you ever get that impression?
Not a single one, actually, because none of them care about stocks or
You are a
economics.
lucky person.
What they care about the most is socialism and like promoting these stupid socialist policies. And I'm
Oh,
like,
now I have to bite my tongue.
you are so wrong.
The one thing that I saw. So let me ask you this. So in terms of kind of younger generation, the friends that are kind of talking about socialism, do they truthfully know what they're talking about? Like, are they educated and or like, have they even read Karl Marx, or is it just something that sounds really good to them?
To them, it sounds like free shit. That's literally it.
That's
Because,
true.
like, if you think about it, they're like, oh, free healthcare, housing for all. And they're like, Green New Deal and free college. Free things, that's what attracts young people because, face it, nobody wants to pay like high tuitions. Nobody wants to pay like high taxes unless if you're a crazy liberal. That's another rabbit hole. But anyways, nobody wants to pay for anything, so they want free things. But they fail to like take into recognition and think for a second that there's multiple steps to get around with it.
Right.
And that is entirely like there are so many ways that you can like make your life more simple if the government just stays the hell out of your business.
Yes. Yeah. I can't. I like if I could just copy and paste one comment that I can continually like post on people's Twitter posts, it would be that. Like, we don't need this. Just stay out of the way, right? Like, just stop trying to intervene and think that you know how to structure things better than I do, or at the very least that, if I don't learn how to structure it correctly, then, I need to suffer those consequences so that I actually end up learning the lesson. Um, I think that's the problem. Is a lot of people think that that's just a stereotype. Like, a lot of people think that it's just kind of like the the exception to the rule, and the person who gets made an example of on social media, who's like a 20 something who's like pro socialism. But there's actually like some truth to it, which is really scary. I think it's really scary. What do you say to people like that? I mean, is it just simply like, you're wrong, or is there some kind of emotional or kind of like story that you can tell them that starts to get them to understand how that's kind of like a naive viewpoint?
Well, I would tell them, because this is actually a true story. I actually used to be a socialist a year ago when I actually started off in politics. And
Wow. All right.
yeah,
I
that's
love that.
crazy. Yeah, and then I realized, like, with education, because I actually did start off in before I joined YAL, I was actually in a podcast with a bunch of conservatives, and I started realizing, well, this podcast didn't happen for a reason. So I decided to listen to these people talk, and
Wait,
I
wait, hold
started
on. Were you the socialist in the conservative podcast? Is that what it was?
one of them.
No, okay, all right.
There was two of us. One was a
Yeah,
libertarian socialist. That's an oxymoron.
yeah. You've learned better since, I'm sure.
Yes, I have. And like I look back on it and I'm just like, oh my God, I was so wrong, because the reason why I actually was a socialist at first was because it was just so mainstream, especially in the Northeast, to believe that, okay, we need free things. We need to tax the rich, because that just seems like the moral thing to do. But it really isn't, because if you think about it, you're stealing people's personal ownings and their personal like things, and that's just wrong. That's theft, and it is wrong. It's a whole concept of morality, and also a whole concept of understanding, like just think about it. Name a single country in which socialism has worked. None. None.
A lot of people will try and say like, oh, Sweden or whatever, and you're like, their economy is less socialist than America,
Yeah.
and they are floored to hear that. Floored. But yeah, no, I'm sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead.
It's okay. So yeah, I began like how I changed is that I began like understanding that, like, okay, you should understand like the other ways around the political spectrum. So I did a lot of reading. I read a lot of pieces. I read a book by Rand Paul, and I started really understanding the case against socialism. And I started understanding that I was wrong this entire time. And I believe it was criminal justice reform and taxation which what pulled me towards the liberty movement. And then when I opened up my eyes and realized I was wrong, like I realized, wow, I've been a libertarian this entire time. So
Yeah,
that's why I feel like education is so important, because there's not many people like me out there who would take time to educate themselves. Sometimes you need to educate people yourself.
yeah. Let me ask you this. So the nature of someone changing their I would call it ideology, or kind of their frame of reference, right? When it comes to politics, um, what would you say is like? There's no one conversation. I'm pretty sure unless I'm wrong, like there's probably no one conversation where all of a sudden you had like this aha moment. Like all of a sudden you were like, oh wow, I'm wrong. Like there's got to be a progression, but that progression takes a period of time. What do you think someone on the liberty side of this discussion can do to kind of like facilitate, or at the very least kind of like not alienate someone so that they don't go on that path or that progression?
So by path, you mean from a socialist to a libertarian?
Well, yeah, or from anything to being, anything that's more kind of like authoritarian to something that's more libertarian.
Okay, so I have like 3 steps that I did because I was able to actually get 3 socialist friends of mine to more pro-liberty stance within the last 2 months, and I actually got them to be in my New Jersey network. But the case is
Hold
that
on. First of all, we need to write a book, like, or you need to write a book, like, just like talk it into a speaker. Maybe I'll type it out or something. But so keep going. You have 3 steps. I love this. Go ahead.
yeah, I have 3 steps. So one, you form a conversation and you basically talk about like say, okay, let's talk about the lockdown. So say like, hey, how you doing? And then you're gonna talk about how you feel about the lockdown. So we'll say, doesn't this just suck that we're at home all the time and we're literally staring at a computer screen? And then usually nobody likes this. So they would say, yeah. And I'm like, well, you could blame the government for that because they enforced this. They enforced the lockdowns. They enforced everybody to lose their jobs and go hungry. And then they'd be like, but that makes no sense. It's not the government. It's literally just because of the virus. And I'm like, it's not just because of the virus. It's because of mass government control and the fact that New Jersey is one of the most regulated states in the country.
Mhm.
And I begin to educate them like this, and they try to understand. They're like, "You don't know what you're talking about," and I do because I bring up the New Jersey Constitution. I bring up the Constitution, the United States Constitution. I educate them with books and resources, and I show them videos.
Mm.
And that is how you educate people from. You tell them that okay, you ask them, okay, so name a country in which socialism has worked, and then they'll stutter and I would say, okay, I'm waiting, and they'd say, oh, Sweden. I'll be like, no, Sweden is like somewhat a democratic socialist type of country, but they are not socialism entirely.
Right.
And so when you instead of like calling them stupid or like threatening to throw them out of helicopters like the stupid libertarians on Twitter, you need to you need to educate them.
Yes. Yeah. So even with the education, they're still going to push back, right? So is it just a matter of consistency? Is that what it is?
Not only consistency, but to inspire them and to show them that because so many socialists that I have seen and I've been friends with, they all had this type of anger in their heart against the two-party system. So let me tell you something. Socialists and libertarians share one common thing, and that is we hate the two-party system.
Mm. Yeah.
And usually a lot of socialists are actually non-interventionists. I have been a non-interventionist my entire like political like I mean from the beginning of 2019 I've been a non-interventionist. And
Mm.
they share that trait with libertarians. So when you start building that hatred for the two-party system, you're like, well, that's the wrong way. So come here, and then we'll like tell them that okay, so your education will be much cheaper if we get the government out of the education system.
Yeah. Yeah.
If we improvise on providing school choice to families and to all the people, then you wouldn't have to worry about free college. And then they'd be like, but we all want free college because people can't afford it. And I'm like, because the government regulates it. If the government regulates something, they can either put up the price or they could bring down the price. But most likely they will put up the price in order to fund for stupid programs in the United States.
Yeah.
So that's how you educate them. And if they try to push back, then you bring up another argument stating that, well, with whose money are you going to pay for free college? Who's going to pay for that? Nobody's going to pay for that.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of winning. And then eventually one gets tired to be like, okay, leave me alone. But then when you make enough points, they always come back to me. They're like, Sarah, you kind of make a little bit more sense. And I'll be like, good, now watch this video. And
Yeah.
usually I show them a Ron Paul video about the war on drugs because socialists agree with us on the war of drugs, usually.
Yeah.
And then they'll be like, oh my God, we actually have a lot in common. So why not I look at this side? That's how you get them.
Yeah. I think you're spot on there. I think a lot of people, the vast majority of people, want the same thing, right? I think where we disagree or kind of where we find conflict is, when we're hashing out what it looks like to actually get there. And so I have this big like the one thing that brought me to libertarianism was the law of unintended consequences. Okay, this idea that you can have the best intentions in mind, but still muck it all up, right? And just the idea that government, the process of government, is so flawed and inefficient that it literally needs to be the last option. Like, seriously, like, you need to try everything else before you turn to the government. The problem is that we've kind of like flipped that on its head. And nowadays, it's almost like everything we go to the government first because we think it's the path of least resistance. And I love the fact that you're kind of using these, these personal experiences that the other folks that you're talking to in your circle are coming up against, because that's the perfect way to do it. Like, you talk about these things and they say, well, what about this? The key as a libertarian or someone who is liberty minded is you have to understand, you almost have to anticipate like where they're going to come from. Right. So if they're going to come from the standpoint of like, well, oh, well, this would have been a better scenario, you have to be able to lay out the reasons why, like, either one, it wasn't a better scenario, or two, why, what you gained, the value proposition wasn't there because you gave up so much more. Right. So a perfect example is, say the worst case scenario was, we lose X number of lives to COVID. Okay. What's the worst case scenario of how many lives we lose to, depression and suicide, to people that are not getting elective procedures that are technically screenings for cancer and heart disease, or even treating those situations? As soon as you start having that conversation, at the beginning of COVID, it was all like, we need to do everything we can to save every single life. And the conversation at the beginning of COVID needed to be, well, yeah, but have you ever thought about the fact that you're saving this life at the expense of this life? And I don't think anyone or not very many people were having that conversation. It was all about, if one person shows up on the COVID death rolls, that's too many. And you're like, well, yeah, but there's a bigger picture. Like, how many total people are dying? Right. And that's a very deep conversation, and it's tough to have. I love the fact that you're drawing parallels to, their daily life and kind of what they're going through. Do you think we're winning, or do you think that there is still, just a superior marketing machine on the other side of this that's still kind of like outpacing us?
I would say we are winning statewide and locally, but the problem is that there has been an emergence with socialism against like libertarianism, conservatism. But the problem is the GOP will never beat like the upcoming socialists until we actually work together in order to defeat them. Because face it, it doesn't matter if you're a neocon or a napcon or just a typical big R Republican or a libertarian. We all have a common enemy, and that is socialism. Because face it, we all love our free markets and we all love this country. We can't let the socialists destroy this country. But the problem is that it is incredibly hard to beat them until we can't reform the GOP itself. And that's where I come in, because I am not, I'll be honest with you, I'm not an LPer at all. I'm a Republican, but I'm also like a small libertarian, if that makes sense. So like kind of like your Ron Paul libertarian. That's me. So I work with the GOP only because I see more of a bigger advantage, not only to reform the party, but to beat socialism within that party. And if they honestly allow us to work with them in order to bring up new ideas such as legalizing marijuana, and to also like fundamentally bring criminal justice reform, which also started in the GOP this year with President Donald Trump. They cannot win without us, and we need to work together in order to beat them.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I come at it, I don't come at it from a different angle. I just call it a little bit different. Okay. I can understand where you're coming at it from, kind of combating the socialism or socialist kind of, perspective, because that's probably the predominant thing that you're coming up against with your peer group, right? Like, the majority of them are kind of probably identifying with Bernie, with AOC, with Ilhan Omar, and other people that look like them or their age, right? Like the ones that you're kind of trying to bring bring some religion to, so to speak, right? I'm a little bit more wider sweeping with it, where I say, like let's fight authoritarianism just like in general. And what's tough is the Democrats tried to co-opt that word when they're facing Donald Trump because they want everyone to look at him as if he's a fascist, right? And they kept using the words fascist and authoritarian almost interchangeably. And most of us that are like on the big L libertarian side, okay, are going, you're right, okay, but at the same time, you're using a different word for exactly the same thing that you're doing, right? Like you are authoritarian as well. Rhinos are authoritarian because they practice appeasement, right? Rhinos are authoritarian because they decide that they need to make a deal with the devil and basically sell out their core beliefs in order to get something done. Democrats, centrist Democrats, are authoritarian in a corporatist way because they're basically bought and sold on the daily, depending on how the wind blows and who writes the biggest check. And then the Democratic Socialists, or the more progressives, are authoritarian because they believe the state does a better job of regulating equality than free market competition, right? So we come at it from the same way. And I appreciate the fact that you're calling it what you need to call it because your demographic is probably associating that word with the juxtaposition of what you're at. But I agree with you. I think the infighting, like me personally, I know you're probably connected with Austin Peterson, right?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh
So
God.
so there's infighting amongst libertarians to be like, well, is Austin Peterson a libertarian, or is he just a, kind of like a Republican who says he's a libertarian? I, to my extent, like I really don't care, and I've been openly critical of him on Twitter, and I've given him crap. But you know what? It's because it's Twitter, and pretty much everyone gives everyone crap on Twitter, right?
Mhm.
If you form your world opinion or your life opinion based off of what happens on Twitter, get off of Twitter, okay? Because there are all kinds of, like, Twitter is just mayhem. But that being said, at the end of the day, I would rather there be more Austin Petersons because he's coming at it at least from a liberty mindset, right? I appreciate that. I can be both critical of Rand Paul and also supportive of him, right? In certain contexts. So they're not the end. Like someone who is like more of a libertarian leaning Republican is not the enemy to someone who identifies as a big L libertarian, right? That's not the enemy. The enemy is someone who thinks that the state needs to control every aspect of life and they know better. That's who the enemy is, right? So at the end of the day, what I appreciate about YAL is it's truly the common ground, right? It's truly that crossover between those two very common belief systems where there's more that we share in common than we don't agree on. And so I think that's a message to anyone who identify themselves as, a big L libertarian or even a libertarian leaning Republican that watches this. Know that like we're both fighting the same fight. There's some small differences between us, but at the end of the day, it's the same thing as you're probably familiar with, like the difference between someone who identifies as libertarian and someone who's like an ANCAP, right? Like okay, so there's some nuanced differences there, or maybe even not even nuanced differences. I mean, there might be some big differences, but the one thing I tell them is like, look, let's shrink government by 95%, and then you and I can fight over the last 5, right? Like, I would rather that be the case than both of us not be able to shrink government at all, and us trying to take the moral high ground with who is more, ANCAP or who is more libertarian. So I think that's a good message to kind of put out there. All right, so I've basically taken an hour and 15 minutes of your life. I appreciate it. I want to say thank you very much, and helping to give some more people some insight into YAL and the leadership training. Do you have any like final parting thoughts in terms of just YAL? How can people get involved, in YAL, or at the very least, kind of get informed about what's going on there?
Well, we have right now, right now we are actually phone banking for Canada and Texas. Her name is Shelley Luther. She is a liberty-minded candidate that is actually a salon owner. And so her salon was closed down due to like the state government in Texas. And so she is a liberty fighter and she's fighting for small businesses in Texas. So right now we are phone banking for her. We actually begin phone banking tomorrow in order to help her like win the election. And so we have a lot of volunteer offices. We also have Operation Win at the Door, which is like we hire college students who are election coordinators and they basically knock doors for these candidates. And we're going to need a lot of that in especially New Jersey and Virginia. Virginia is also going to have an off-year election cycle. And the way people can get involved in YAL is by joining as a dues paying member. A dues paying member is like someone who basically joins YAL as a yearly member. Like they pay like $10 a year and they join YAL and they are basically surrounded by people who are like-minded to them and join the community and get involved. And so that's the job of us state chairs. We help recruit these people into YAL and we don't charge them for just $10, but we basically empower them and we basically teach them about the principles of liberty and freedom within the state and local politics. And this happens usually within the college like student organizations, and this also happens within the community. So it's welcome to anybody who's like even a high schooler. I have some high schoolers, and then all the way up to it doesn't matter. There's no age limit.
Awesome. Yeah. So really quickly, I'm going to share this as well. If I can pick the correct tab that I'm looking at, this is the overview for Operation Win at the Door. So if you go to yaliberty.org/door, this will come up. This will kind of give you a little bit of an insight into what Operation Win at the Door is. I would highly recommend, whether or not you're a Republican, a libertarian, an independent, even a Democrat who is on the liberty side or the libertarian side of being a Democrat, you need to know what Operation Win at the Door is, and you also need to. This is again highlighting the 179 victories I think YAL has had so far, but you need to find out about what they have as far as resources. YAL is providing not a platform, but they're providing such a huge value add if you're curious about running, or if you're running and you need something to take you over the top in your race. That's a winnable race. If you are liberty minded, you need to find out about it. I even forget, how the heck did I get signed up for the leadership training? What the heck was the link? I can't even remember where the heck
it was. LCA. I think it was like YAL.org/Liberty Candidate Academy, and it was a form that you have to fill out.
Hold on, I'm typing yaliberty.org/ what was it?
Liberty Candidate Academy.
Hold on. This might be like a huge flop in terms of me not being able to find it. You know what? I should have it like in my history, but let's see. Leadership Institute. I have the announcements from the Leadership Institute. Here's what I'll do. When this is recorded and put up on YouTube, I am going to share the link down below for signing up for the Liberty Academy. That is a huge resource. Again, regardless, Republican, Libertarian, Independent, Democrat, huge resource that you should take advantage of. If you can make it to one of those, you should. Those 18 steps are solid. They're money. Like they are, and you don't have to pay for it. That's the other thing. It is completely covered by the donors that donate to YAL and take care of that program. So it is a free training to get you in the door, to get you the resources and the training that you need to be able to start running a campaign that's, got a shot at winning. So just pay attention to that. Look, I want to thank you, Sarah. I appreciate all your time. I know it's precious. Again, reminder to everyone, if you've made it this far, if you're watching the recorded version, please like, comment, subscribe, and share. And definitely get in touch with YAL or follow them and what they're putting together. Have a good night. We're gonna have to put together something, a live stream of Among Us or something else that's kind of like in vogue to get some Liberty people out there playing some video games online.
Yes, we do. And we also have to work on building the New Jersey coalition.
That is very true. That is very true. All right, we're gonna also have to do this again sometime. I'm gonna have to get you back because I want to see. I want to find out where you end up too. So I definitely want to follow your progress through this period. But I appreciate it, Sarah. Everyone who watched or is watching, thank you very much. Have a good night, and we'll see you next week on our regular time, Tuesday at 5 p.m. Have a good one, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.